Finally, last principle, address causation, treatment, or restoration of fitness and/or the question of reasonable accommodation only if asked to do so by the referring party. I think addressing causation, which of course is a concept with legal, not simply clinical relevance, usually requires data that aren't normally available to us in a fitness for duty evaluation, such as the exposure to, let's say the person is claiming that their PTSD results from an industrial trauma exposure, and that trauma exposure was a real and documented incident. Does that mean that their PTSD results from that? You know, after the fact, therefore because of the fact? No. It could have resulted from, at least in part, from childhood trauma or from other industrial trauma that preceded the agency exposure.
Or made them more vulnerable.
Or made them more vulnerable. But that's typically going to be the you know, that
their allegation.
Well, yeah, but there's still a proximate cause, even if they were fragile when they were, you know, you bought the cow and you own the milk. But the larger issue is that the kind of data that would allow us to parse out causation, industrial causation, aren't typically available to us, because in a fitness for duty evaluation, we don't care whether that person's PTSD symptoms that impair their ability to safely and effectively perform their duties results from industrial or non-industrial causes. It's irrelevant to me. So when they ask me, gee, is that an industrial, you know, is it caused by the job? I don't know. I don't. And it's not part of my referral question, because I don't, it's a whole different path and methodology. Keep in mind that treatment is a matter generally determined by the employee and his or her personal health care provider, and that accommodation is an interactive process that's usually initiated by the employee. Now the EEOC gives some nice advice on how employers can navigate through, well, let me get to that one next. In limiting your discussion of treatment, keep in mind what the EEOC says about your role. And that is, a doctor should not be responsible for making employment decisions or deciding whether or not it is possible to make a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability. That responsibility lies with the employer. And I often quote this in my reports.
Don't ask me.
I'm giving it, you know, either as a footnote or as a preamble to the employer. The doctor's role should be limited to advising the employer about an individual's functional abilities and limitations in relation to job functions, and about whether the individual meets the employer's health and safety requirements. Accommodation is not a psychologist's decision. It's an employer's decision informed by medical information. So when they say, gee, can we provide a reasonable accommodation? You decide that. I'm happy to give you some information that will be useful in your making the determination, but it's not our role to make that determination.